was surrounding us. And that there was a need for a much more, I would say, from an inside job, working the system from the inside out. That was going to be my life. So, moved then to very quickly to a career of, working just as you guys do. I started working as a photographer, moved into the advertising industry, started a few agencies. Very, very earlier on, I grew up here in Italy, actually here in Milan. But when I was 20, I decided that the glass roof was a bit too short for me, even though clearly stature is not my strong forte. And I realized that very quickly I needed to go somewhere else to be able to, just be what I wanted to be. And so I left Italy in a hurry, especially when they told me, you're not going to go anywhere far in this country until you got gray hair. And that's still not happening clearly, in my case. But I think what was interesting is that then very quickly grew into a space of when you find the right people around you, you find the right context around you, which in this case was I lived in Australia, I lived in a bunch of countries in Asia. Very, very quickly, in 20 years abroad, I ended up kind of, drinking out of the fire hose, ended up running a couple of agencies and then picking up momentum in the creative industry up to, I think, my last gig with a large sort of media group called Maxus. I ended up I found myself in 20 years having lived and worked in 162 countries in the world, and there's only 198 just for context. So I spent an enormous amount of time traveling and literally visiting all sorts of different places around the planet, working, building offices, creating a sense of career out of just being on a jet plane, which is fantastic on one side, because you get to see incredible amounts of cultures, incredible amounts of differences in way of working, and the idea of Kismet therefore really became a thing. Very, very quickly, I found myself in this really odd situation of being kind of like, that film from George Clooney, Up in the Air, where he finds himself stranded, not knowing exactly what am I going to do with my life at this point in time. 4.5 million kilometers flown in the air does take a toll on you, apparently. I didn't know that at the time. And in 2016, I get completely knocked out. And my body basically decides that the night and day are the same thing. And I don't know if you know, but sleeping is actually really, really important, apparently, for you. It's what keeps you alive. So my body shuts down entirely, and I'm forced to take some time off. Actually, 6 months off. And 6 months off in which I'm asked to be in one place for a very long period of time, which is not what I was accustomed to. I was on a plane every second day, if not every day. I think in 2016, before this happened, I slept more on airplanes than I slept on land. So that's how weird my life was at the time. And so in that time off, when you realize the company that I was working for at the time started sort of acting out on me a little bit, because I was no longer the flying around, sing and dance, opening up offices. I wasn't that corporate jockey anymore. So I was not valuable anymore all of a sudden. And that was a big sort of turning point after I spent 20 years building a company with 3,500 people around the world, 72 offices, clients in 160 countries. And that's when it really came too close to me. So going, okay, so maybe there's something there. There's a dark side to the corporate world that isn't quite what is advertised when you're in it. And so very quickly for me then, there was this idea of, okay, this is interesting. I had to rewire most of my life. Spending 6 months in one location after you spend 20 years traveling on an everyday basis is not exactly as simple as an adjustment. But lucky for me, I've always had lots of passions. The mountain is one of them. Always been a big skier, loved skiing. And so I chose to live actually in Canada for a period of time, which is amazing, by the way. If you have never been, the mountains in Canada are stellar. Picked up at skiing, became a ski instructor and a ski guide. And very quickly I said, okay, if I could do that as a job, I'll be happy. If I've left my corporate world, kind of jaded by okay, if I'm used to you, I'm good. If I'm not used to you, I'm not good anymore. If I need to replenish the energy that I've provided you, I'm not good anymore. How does that work? It's quite a stark contrast in that sense. So I picked up, doing the things that I love the most: skiing, photography. Went back into the world of advertising through a different lens, literally behind the camera this time again. Worked for a bunch of brands. Stayed in one place for a very long time. Worked in the mountains, which is incredible because it just, the sun goes up, you wake up. The sun goes down, you go to sleep. Pretty simple. The best. I thought that was the life. Then, of course, 2019 arrives. I'm back in Italy for my sister's wedding, and it's at the end of the year, and therefore I travel back, spending time here with her. Of course, COVID hits. So my entire life, which at that point in time was chasing winters and flying on an helicopter, bombing itself on the mountains with people, shooting down people coming from the top of glaciers and mountains, etc., to being stuck in a 4x4 apartment overlooking a red brick wall. And that's COVID for me. I'm in Milan, which is a city that I left 20 also years ago, and I find myself thinking, okay, this is a new adventure. I need to find ways of staying in this confinement. So that dream life, all of a sudden that I was living, came to an halt, saying, what if that is taken away from me again? So the life before, done. This new life, which I constructed with passion and love, etc., well, that's not possible anymore. And it hasn't been. So if you go living season by season, you know that if you don't follow the seasons, then there is no money. There is no job in that. And so I find myself in the midst of COVID thinking, that's a good life when you're 20 years old and you don't have too much to worry about. But at my age, I'm over 40, you start to realize that that's not a viable alternative for the future. And you start to really quickly consider why. And so you start to then thinking about this idea of, why do I have to hunt for this, sacred grail of, I can either have the life that I want, or I can do the work that I want. Why the two things don't match? Why there is this, strange predicament whereby if we have a corporate career, we have security and safety nets and all that jazz, and if we choose an alternative career, we don't. What if there was a way to actually create and connect in the middle? In a sense, kind of a lifetime of freedom doesn't have to be constrained by what you do for a living, in my mind. So in, was it June 21, I'm speaking on the phone to an old colleague of mine, David Webster, which is following us online now. And we've been working together for 10 years across multiple jobs. He was the head of BBH for many, many years, a brilliant guy, super, super smart. He's coming out of his own experience with BBH as well, saying, I'm done. And we chat, and we started talking about, what if there's a way that we can change this balance? What if there's a way that we can kind of re-architect a new kind of company, which is, is less about the stick and more about the carrot, hence the name, the Carrot Collective explained. What if there's a way that we can actually rewire that logic and rewire fundamentally the way that we approach work? Not with a work-life balance where, you get 3 days of holiday every now and then, where your life determines how you work, which is quite the opposite. What if we can build around this idea that in 2021, we were still in the midst of the pandemic, and a lot of people have lost a job. The creative community, as its own broad spectrum, has found itself really quite confronted by the challenges of, the bigger companies kind of folding off, the offices environment that were built around fostering a certain creative community by proximity, don't quite know how to work that anymore. The piping for that system didn't exist quite yet. We moved everything into virtual, but we're still very human, and we still need, face-to-face connections. So how do we rewire all of this in a way that is efficient, because we can't wait 10 years to make it work, but also effective, because we can't stop thinking about the way that we as humans interact. And so we designed kind of this idea, little by little, starting from the three of us, a new kind of agency, with this idea of kind of a network of distributed talent, and really designed around this concept of, if you engage with a single-minded proposition of constructing work around people's life, very quickly you find that there's a real good balance in the way you approach the industry, because all of a sudden you don't have to make sacrifices. You don't have to kind of refer to a certain workforce that is able to work 9 to 5, and it presents itself in a certain way. All of a sudden, you can open the entire spectrum of opportunities around lifestyle choices, around opportunities, effectively. And so then comes the idea of stakeholder capitalism. I mean, you might have heard the term, which I think is a fundamental shift in mindset that opens up to the opportunity of really, first and foremost, redistribute the value of what the agency is. So, for instance, for us, the idea is that the agency is not ours, meaning we are the owners. The agency is yours, of those that collaborate with us, engage with us, etc. So that the agency redistributes its own value to the people that are making it, not to the people that own it. So that's kind of at the fundamental kind of underpinning logic of it. And what it turns out to be is that this system of stakeholder capitalism is better, first of all, for the people, because you get the fair share of what you're working with. You're no longer just a cog in the machine, but you're part of it as much as everybody else is. You are just as valuable as everybody else involved in the organization. The second part is that it's also much better for brands. For people, I work predominantly with brands as kind of our interface in the world, but broadly you can extend that to anyone. It's better for them because all of a sudden there is no company in the world that can hire as much talent as it's needed at the time. Even a company as big as this one can never have the right amount of talent all the time to service the industry that is changing every day. We were talking about the other day this conference about metaverse. The level of knowledge that was involved in this conference is a month old. How do you find and hire talent for that? You can't, right? The evolution of our industry, the communication industry, the creative industry at large, is constant. So how do you create and hire? When we're talking to the EAD, which is an incredible, talent in a sense, creator being that day in education for that matter. We're talking to them about how they go about innovating in their space. How do they design courses and masters and education for skills that are not there yet? How do you do that? You can't. So the system is not defined by hiring people, like keeping them under your belt, but by defining networks of connectivity that are far more efficient and effective. So it's better for brands, therefore, because I can work with people from anywhere in the world with any skill set in any geography and connecting to a need of a client, for instance. But it's also better for society because if you think about it, the cost of the Industrial Revolution and the way of bringing people to a physical office, not that I've got anything against these beautiful offices, by the way, which are hosting us today. But the idea is very much about how do you create a relationship with the cost that this has of moving people from places to places. I mean, I used to travel. If I think about the amount of CO2 that I put in the atmosphere after 4,500 kilometers flown, it's something quite staggering. I'm responsible for half the Amazon forest going by myself, pretty much. So that the cost of flying people around, the cost of commuting, all the costs that we know are human costs involved in the Industrial Revolution, effectively have a real gigantic tax. So if I can lay down the pipes to make that cost for society be lowered, it's a big deal. If I have a principle of sustainability built around, again, this idea of what do you need in your life to work, and how can we provide for that so that when you work, you are at your best. You're not working, in the ungodly hours of the day. You're not consuming energy when it's not necessary, and so on and so forth. So there's a sustainability element built in it to begin with as a conceptual thinking. Especially because when you think about, that this idea of the Industrial Revolution was designed around a master-slave efficiency effect, right? How can I extract more value out of the 8 hours that I've got someone punching in something for X amount of time? How can I make that, valuable? That's a big sort of question mark. I mean, the idea of a need for control and for, you have to clock in and clock out. I need to know that you're there, you're physically at your desk or at your, workstation, clocking in your time so that I can measure that output and improve it over time. Okay? So the idea, therefore, was that we would build rules. The Industrial Revolution is set on the idea of building rules, not tools for people, not tools for making the work better, but just for improving marginally the efficiency of the work. And lastly, when you think about the impacts that is, we're seeing now, which I would say is the post-industrial revolution age. What we're seeing is this deconstruction of the cities, deconstruction of even Milan, which is this incredible center of gravity for a strong European and international audience, is changing over time. It's becoming very quickly a city that actually is losing its own people. We have seen Milan actually shrinking in terms of influx on an everyday basis. And Milan traditionally was a place that everyone would come in from the outside in. Even the construction of the entire city was designed for coming in, do your job, get out. That's a different story in a sense. But what we're seeing now is that even the city of Milan is actually losing a lot of its people. People are moving out because they don't have to commute anymore. So proximity is no longer a thing, even in a city like Milan, which is built on that DNA. So what that means is that the coming back to office or back to normal, as you keep hearing saying, is no longer a necessity, and we've all realized that. So therefore, this idea of so if that was before, and that's what we're going for in the future, this idea of better for people at all cost becomes a narrative that we try to design around. How do we do creative things? How do we do creative communities around this? And if you put this idea of better for people at all cost kind of at the center of the conversation, very quickly you realize that the issues of gender gap, lifestyle choices, and life-work balance become a non-issue, because you attract people that can work in their own time, at their own ways, in their own context. All of a sudden you realize that if you flip the Industrial Revolution, mechanic, which is come here, deliver your work, go out, live your life. If you flip that, live your life, deliver your work, and come here sometimes. Or come here in ways that are not necessarily the ones that we're thinking about now. We've all experienced 2 years of perfectly functioning, almost, with these medias, the digital media. This tool that is on my side is a digital whiteboard that enables to connect people and co-work on very interesting parts of the planets that can cooperate on an individual task. So even the things that I used to run a lot of workshops for brands, even those workshops are now become interactive and cooperative in many interesting ways. So we've expressed creatively an answer to a problem that we couldn't face otherwise, right? And I think we're improving constantly on that front. So this idea, therefore, of kind of creating a connection, really, that is centered around better for people at all cost, could be a solution for the way we go about this stuff. And lastly, I think that, when I think about this space, I really find it fascinating how the idea of a tool that up until yesterday was a tool for geeks, I'm talking about blockchain in particular, a tool for, the new economy or these new currencies, which, some people understand a lot of, not a lot of people understand a lot of, sorry, but a lot of people talk about it, the NFT world, which is kind of in everyone's marketer's mouth at the moment. What underpins all of this is blockchain is a principle effectively established around network, right? And the idea of decentralization. So a decentralized organization or decentralized autonomous organization in a trustless world. The bank system exists because I go put my money, someone writes that this is your cash, so that I can come back a month later and say, hey, where's my cash? Here's your cash. Okay, so the bank holds the story, the company holds the story, but if you distribute that story in everyone's pocket, so I've got the story of everyone in my pocket, cryptically, so to speak, then all of a sudden we move from the idea of company to a network-based interaction, where what is set is a significant value at the source, and we're transferring value from entity to relationships, and blockchain is fundamentally designed for that, where I don't need to I can operate in a trustless environment to create the means for people to interconnect with one another. Smart contracting, for instance, which is something that there's not a lot of conversations around because it's an evolution, if you will, of the opportunity offered by blockchain to create trustless interaction. So there is no intermediary. I can develop a relationship with you of work, and there's a smart contract in place between us that defines how we interoperate. By entering into this space, the rules are set on how we interact. And we, as an autonomous organization,
Sorry.
People at home
Sometimes it happens. So I don't know why, but
like
go on.
unintentional dab.
Yeah.
And so if you enter in this space of trustless relationship, all of a sudden there's a network connectivity which we define the context and the rules of, not the organization, but the participants. And that's very much where, for instance, we've taken a lot of the, if you will, design of the blockchain world and applied it into the way that we interact with people and interact with, work. And to me, that's kind of where things get really interesting, right? Because we move from this idea of ego, which is, me at the center of the world, to an idea of ecosystem. And so from ego to echo, all of a sudden, everything kind of starts to redefine the approach. Because
Can I stop you just for a moment, because this is a very kismet moment, because our first speech here was about from ego to echo.
There you go. Exactly. I think it's a super important idea. When we shift around the idea of being equal parts of the way that we work, which is not an insignificant part of our lives. When we have a say in the way we work, we're part of an ecosystem. We build that ecosystem together, and all of a sudden, everything changes because when you feel that someone has made a decision for you, and I personally have a gigantic hate for that. When someone makes a decision on my behalf, which unfortunately tends to happen a lot in this country, I'm not very happy because I feel that I had no saying in it, or if I had very, very little saying in it. But if this idea of, therefore, distributed autonomous organization, or DAO, as you might hear in conversation in the blockchain world, they're redefining quite dramatically the way that we approach work, or could redefine dramatically the way we approach work. Therefore, what becomes important is this idea of kind of a minimum viable ecosystem, right? So if I'm on my own, there's very little rules that I can decide upon in a practical way. So I need to create a network. And I need to create a network of people and talent that kind of wants to be part of defining and designing and structuring the future of work. and wants to be involved in the definition of the rules that apply to how we pay people. We have actively about 1,500 people globally working for us. We only have 7 employees in our company, but we run projects at every geography of the world across such a variety of disciplines, and we only started about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. So it took me 20 years to build a team of 3,700 people and 72 offices. We've achieved the same, almost the same, at speed in less than a year through this model. So when I was saying before, better for people and better for brands, but also better for us, we don't need to have infrastructures. We need to lay down networks. And that's where things change, because when in the building of a network, you make everyone part of the building of the network, you create something that is better than the sum of the parts. And that's kind of by definition in my mind. Allowing tools for creativity in the design of the organization, as well as in the outputs of the organization. I know it's so very smoky, right? So let me give you some practical examples. Because, it's all good and dandy to talk about, organizational changes and all that jazz, the future of work, but what does it actually mean? For us, let me give you some examples that are very, very practical. In the way that we build, for instance, tools and teams. So we create a platform where essentially that enables people to connect to the organization, smart contracting in place so that we define what the rules of engagements are. And that is a single source of talent pool for us to access. I need a designer in Brazil, I need a copywriter in Sydney, and I need a interactive user experience designer in Toronto. So that can be done. But the system already does it. We don't have to kind of create. We lay down the pipes so that people can connect. The policies are defined at the source. So I only work 3 hours a day because I'm a mother, for instance, and I only have that much time. And that's what I want to be paid for those 3 hours. That's your access point. That's how you define your relationship. Then the system knows and the system provides. So what's the fundamental difference between that and, say, Upwork, as an example, like a portal where you can just, feed work to and people can apply to and kind of provide you a job. The difference is actually in the fact that the network is created by proximity. So it's created by the ability of bringing talent in that is certified in a way, that is already provided through work that was done before or interactive work, actually, value. And the network judges itself. So that, the operation in a team that we create, like the example of before, Sydney, Toronto, and what was that, Brazil, or that team self-defines its interaction. It will go well. Smart feedback system, so that automatically the team defines its own rules, but also defines its own ways of operating and its own feedback system that pulls back into the system. So all of a sudden, this thing kind of enriches itself. We don't have to do much. We just have to create the fundamental blocks for connectivity. So, in policies, like, we ask people the only policies that we enforce are policies that are about, obviously respect and management of few fundamental factors. Like we ask people that they do take their time off, but not when we mandate it, that they must take at least X amount of time off during the year. Those that are, in our midst, those that are involved in our group. And if they don't, they actually get taxed for it. So if you don't take time off, means that you will be burning out. Sooner or later, you will be leaving us and, spend 6 months heli skiing in Canada. Or not, right? But the idea is, when you start to kind of flip around, what are the needs for people to be respected and to enforce? We enforce only things that are functional to the survival of the individual and to its benefits, in a sense. Everything else, when, how, to what extent you want to work, etc., depends on you. As a management team, for instance, our involvement, we cap our involvement on projects so that we don't end up burning ourselves out. We create means and structures so that we can respect in a way the approaches and the narrative of our own ways of working that are functional to the long haul. I love what I do. I've been in the creative industry for my entire life, and I love what I do. But I don't love doing it when I'm exhausted, when I'm underpaid, or when I'm under the pressure of a system that doesn't feed me, but feeds someone else. So, the idea, therefore, of more carrot and less stick is exactly that. How can we put more value back in the people? How can we create a truly human-centric organization? And how do we develop opportunities for people to really connect into this brave new world, effectively, of creative communities? The reason why we call it collective is because it's more likely to be a collective than an organization. We exist because of our network, not because of me or David or Paolo, which are the three founders of this exercise. So my open invitation, and I'm be running on time here, is inquire and be curious about the space, because as we built it, it's not hard to build another one. As we design organizational processes and thinking that is human centric, I think that it's entirely possible to start really creating your own, or binding to one of ours, for instance. It's not here, not there, but start to really think and ask out of the next opportunity that you have to interact with employers for this building blocks. I truly believe that this is kind of the future, and in many ways, the idea when Maria Chiara sort of presented me with this idea, talking about under this banner of Kismet, for me, this is it. This is the completely unexpected turn of events. If I look at this from my life, being this corporate jockey left out in the world, then stranded in a 4x4 apartment during COVID, to then start what I think is truly going to be the future of the work environment. Back to being the revolutionary, right? So I was in, I was out, I'm back in, and now I'm back out. But it's only when you are back out again and you're looking at what you wanted to revolutionize that you realize what tools you have available. And I truly think that this is an opportunity, and I highly encourage you all to, as a creative industry professional accolade, to really look for the opportunity to reinvent this space, because the tool of the future is creativity, is not the industrial revolution. So thank you very much, everybody, and if you have any questions,
Thank you. It was really great to have this kind of speech here, and in this moment when we are back on thinking about what we are doing with our job lives, maybe. So I want to just underline one thing that I really liked was, okay, we need to distinguish between rules and tools, and finding what is really useful, and the definition of useful is what we use, which is a tool, not a rule.
Exactly.
Actually. So I don't know if everyone has some comment or some inspiration or anything to add. Yes?
What would you do if Elon Musk offers to buy the Carrot Collective?
We're not interested. Not interested. Apart from Elon Musk is not the right kind of character anyway. But even if it was the right kind of character, we haven't designed this to be something to sell. We designed this so that can revolutionize the industry. And by definition, therefore, it's a process. I can't sell a process to anyone.
Obviously, that's the idea behind it, it can evolve in.
I don't think it's never going to be, well, by definition, was never on our thinking process. And the only way that I would imagine this to be valuable is if someone would help us make it bigger and make it better, which so far it's still, it's still to decide. But that would be the only way that we would consider, to truly make what was in our foundation to be better, more efficient, and more reaching further. That would be the only way that we would consider that. Otherwise, we didn't build it to sell it. Any other questions? Even in Italian if you need, no problem at all. Cool. Well, stay in touch. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or on Instagram or email or through the connection of the Creative Mornings. Thank you very much for Creative Mornings for having me here. It's been a while since I've done a Creative Mornings talk. Last one was in Sydney 15 years ago. So
We're still working on it.
Yeah.
In Italy, but we are really happy to
awesome.
have you here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you guys and ladies.
Yeah, you can enjoy a bit of breakfast and a bit of networking for 20
Cool.
minutes more. And then we see each other on the May event. So stay tuned and keep reading the newsletter and you will see what is going to happen. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Bello, mi è piaciuto molto.
Grazie.